Okay, so this is Mrs. Ross, and this is part 2 of the Module C, Unit 3, Lesson 1. Notes, we're at page 140, what causes direct negative effects to biodiversity? So what causes direct? Some activities cause direct negative effects, such as overharvesting of plants and animals. So you could put overharvesting of plants and animals here. What causes indirect negative effects to biodiversity? Other activities cause indirect negative effects. For example, constructing new buildings can destroy habitats and reduce biodiversity. Releasing garbage and pollution into the environment can harm and reduce biodiversity. So constructing new buildings or releasing garbage or pollution. And then this last one, what causes the destruction of or habitat destruction? So, oops, I went too far. We're right here at the bottom. What causes habitat destruction? So activities such as constructions of roads, buildings, towns, and cities cause habitat destruction. Mining and harvesting resources also remove habitats. So you could put a combination of all of that. Construction, mining, harvesting resources, all of that can cause habitat destruction. And an example of a positive impact of introduced species on biodiversity. So let's scroll down a little bit more. Here's our introduced species. It says tulips, orange trees, and other highly valued plants are now grown in the United States. However, they are not native to the country. So a positive impact, an example, would be tulips, orange trees, and highly valued plants. Those are non-native species and are introduced species. So the definition of an introduced species is right here, where you see the italic introduced species. These are non-native species, so species that are not native to or not normally grown in that particular area. So an example of a negative impact of introduced species on biodiversity would be an invasive species. So an invasive species, all right, let's finish these notes off. We were at, let's see, introduced species we defined. We were at the example of negative impact of introduced species. Okay, one example of a negative impact of introduced species on biodiversity is the Burmese python. These are an invasive species that threaten native species in the United States ecosystem. So one of the negative impacts of introduced species is that they threaten the native species. So here's a quick check question. Which of these describes a way in which humans could increase biodiversity in a marine system? Okay, and the answer is going to be they could restrict the amount of each type of fish or shellfish harvested from the ecosystem. Okay. And then on 141, we have how do scientists combat lack of genetic diversity? Let's see, 141, that's 140. Likelihood. Okay, scientists are working on reintroducing into crops some of the wild type genes that were lost during domestication. That lack of diversity. The intention of this bioengineering is to make it hardier crops. The wild cousins of crop plants tend to do better. So one of the ways that they are combating genetic diversity is by reintroducing into crops some of the wild type genes that were lost during domestication, because those are hardier plants. Ways to protect biodiversity. So that's going to be here. I have 4 ways. Let's see if we can find them all. Blah, blah. Wildlife corridors have been created to connect areas of natural habitat divided by roads or development. So wildlife corridors, awareness of overharvesting, creating seed banks around the world. That's only 3. Let's see. Nature preserves. So the first one should be nature preserves to protect habitats, wildlife corridors to connect natural habitats, awareness of overharvesting, and creating seed banks around the world. So those are the 4. What is one way to monitor changes in an ecosystem? So that looks like it's on the next page. Is it going to let me? Okay. One way to monitor changes in an ecosystem. Measuring diversity before and after an ecosystem, before and after a disturbance, is one way to monitor changes in an ecosystem. So let me say that again. Measuring biodiversity before and after a disturbance is one way to monitor changes in an ecosystem. So let's scroll down. Restoration ecology. Gosh, that sounds so cool. Let's see what restoration ecology is. Oh, here we go. Restoration ecology is a field that focuses on restoring freshwater, marine, and land ecosystems. So, restoration ecology is a field that focuses on restoring freshwater, marine, and land ecosystems that have been damaged by human activity. So, you'll need all of that for restoration ecology. And I wonder if this is our last question. Let me see. Oh, that is the last question. One example of a job a restoration ecologist might do. Here's some examples. Here, you just need to pick one. You don't have to put them all. You just need to pick one. So controlling and removing invasive species, helping farmers to use sustainable farming practices, working to improve habitats for specific species, planning and developing practices for soil or land conservation, planning and implementing the restoration of ocean, lake, or streams, shorelines. So pick one and put it there, and let me know if you have any questions.